Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Better Together, SharePoint and Dynamics CRM, brought to you by ArcherPoint and C5 Insight. We're honored to have with us today Jeff Abels, author, speaker, entrepreneur, and international thought leader on customer and employee engagement. His insights have been seen and heard in dozens of global venues, including National Public Radio, Business Week, USA Today, Euroforum, the New Zealand Direct Marketing Journal, the Direct Marketing Association, Digital Summit, and in boardroom briefings across the country. He is the author of The Luck Principle, Business Results at the Intersection of People and Profit, other books and articles, and he is a prolific blog writer on topics related to leadership, customer and employee relationships, and the future of work. He founded C5 Insight, a customer and employee engagement consulting firm, in 2002 and has consulted with hundreds of companies in a broad range of industries. In today's webinar, Jeff will discuss the differences between SharePoint and CRM solutions for application development in a non-technical sense, which one is the better solution for which purpose, and provide a practical overview of CRM as a development platform. In addition, Jeff will share 2 case studies on how the different platforms have succeeded and failed as a platform and the practical integration points between the applications. So let's go ahead and get started. Jeff, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much for that introduction, Suzanne, and thank you everybody for joining us, whatever time of the day it is in your part of the world, for the Better Together webinar. And again, we'll be talking about the potential and pitfalls of combining SharePoint and CRM, and maybe even expanding a little bit beyond that and talking a little bit about Office 365 as well. But let's start with this. It's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, and in the summer of 1960, Robert Carrier came home to find his 10-year-old son with a good friend, and they were hurling down the driveway on their bellies towards the curb. So that looked dangerous. He put a stop to that right away, but the next day he came back, and they were on the back patio doing the same thing. So what did he do about this? Well, it turns out Robert was an upholsterer at a boat seating manufacturer. So the next day he brought home 50 feet of rugged, waterproof synthetic materials. He unrolled it in the backyard, put the garden hose on it, and he watched every kid flock to their house. And you may have guessed by now what that was. That innovation was putting 2 things together that have become known as the slip and slide. So a sheet of plastic and water, who would have known that 2 simple things would go so much better together than they did separately? Now, SharePoint and CRM actually have, or SharePoint and Dynamics 365 certainly have the potential to go better together with each other. But like a lot of things, if you don't put the right 2 things together or put them together in the right way, they also have the potential to not work so well together. So one of the things I want to try to do with you guys today is be really transparent and candid about what works and what doesn't, when you should consider bringing these 2 tools together, and when you might not want to, and when you do bring them together, what works well and what doesn't work so well. So I want to throw it open as you think about questions to any candid questions about that. We built our reputation on being very real with folks and not kind of doing technology for technology's sake, but really saying, look, you don't want to spend money on that right now. It doesn't make sense in your situation in many cases. So feel very free and open to ask any questions you want to. We'll allow a little bit of time at the end of today's session to answer some of those. So as we get into it, we're going to talk a little bit about why. First of all, there's a lot of research has been done on answering the question why lately. You might have even seen some TED Talks on that word why. So we're going to start a little bit with why would you do this? Why do you want to combine SharePoint and CRM? There's some obvious reasons. There's some not so obvious reasons. Then we're going to talk about the basics. So how did Microsoft design the integration to bring these 2 things together? And then we're going to do a deep dive and talk about what if the way that Microsoft designed them to work together doesn't really match your needs? What can you do about that? And what are some business cases for what that might look like? So we'll take a look at those 3 things in succession. We're not going to be very technical today. You'll get a few how-to tidbits, but if you're a developer or a really seasoned administrator and you're looking for how to, we're not going to do too much of that today. We're going to focus a little bit more on why and what it will look like when you do it those ways, and a tiny bit of the how-to. And then if you need to do some follow-up on the technical side, just feel free to reach out to us. So first of all, why? So I'm going to play a little video here. I pre-record it when I do demos, and I want to kind of show you what these things look like. But one of the big reasons why is you might want to save on your Dynamics 365 or CRM storage. For those of you who are using Dynamics already in the cloud, you're probably keenly aware that storage costs are really pretty steep for it. Microsoft has made a few changes that give you a little more storage than you used to have, but still, it can be very exorbitant if you're storing a lot of documents and a lot of emails and that kind of thing in CRM. SharePoint's in the cloud, much more cost effective. Also, CRM, it's really just not a very good document management solution at all. Yes, you can attach documents into it, but finding them, opening them, editing them, and resaving them, sharing them, it just doesn't do any of those things very well at all. By integrating SharePoint with CRM, you also get some ease of use benefits. There's some collaboration benefits, so you can now share those documents that are visible in CRM with people who are not using CRM, both inside and outside of your organization. And then there's this hidden gem of it can be a whole development platform. We'll come back to that at the end of the day, but you can reimagine your business, rethink how you're working together internally by bringing these things together. And we'll give you a few case studies on that as we get in. But for now, let's take a moment and look at what the basics look like, just from a demo standpoint. Let's take a look together at how the out-of-the-box SharePoint and CRM integration works. When you open any account or any record in CRM that you've set this up with, the integration will automatically create a folder in SharePoint to manage the documents. Here I've opened up the SuccessAccelerators account. Now let me navigate to the Documents area. After a moment, the document folder is created, and this area is available for managing your documents in CRM. If I go over here to SharePoint, and I refresh this page, you can see SuccessAccelerators has been added as another area for documents. Back in CRM, let's take a look at how the document management works. I'm going to look up an account, C5 Insight, and navigate to the Documents area of this account. And as you can see, I can see all of my documents right within CRM. These can be available in a number of different places. Here you can see we have some documents that are actually associated with a case underneath this account. So these documents are rolling up hierarchically, just like the CRM hierarchy rolls up. Here are a couple of other ones associated with opportunities. If I were to navigate to those opportunity records, the only documents I would see under there are the ones specifically associated with the opportunity. Since I'm on the account, I'm seeing all the ones for the account and the sub-records. This one's associated with the contact. Now these next couple you can see are actually just associated directly with the account. And then you can also see, we can look at documents not just in SharePoint, but also in OneDrive. And OneDrive also gives me some other options. In this case, I've named this file to make it clear what I'm doing, but I've said this is in OneDrive, and it's a private document. I'm the only one who can see it. I've not shared it. This is one in OneDrive, and I've shared it. I might have shared it internally. I might have shared it externally, but it's available for other people to collaborate with me on, either inside or outside of my organization. And I can easily interact with my documents right inside of CRM as well, including creating new documents. So I'm going to create a new OneNote associated with this account. And now everyone working on this account can work with that document. And I can define where I want this to be. I've defined a number of locations for this account. And just like that, it adds the document for me. If I want to open the document and edit it, it's as simple as clicking it. And just like that, I've created my document. I also have access to the basic document management features of SharePoint. So here you can see I can manage checkout, I can manage check-in, I can do renaming.
But also, if I want to get more advanced feature access, I can just open it up directly in SharePoint. And now I can have full access to all the different SharePoint features, such as version management and all the other things I'm used to managing in SharePoint. But without having to toggle to SharePoint and look up the document, it's just a couple of clicks and I'm opening it up in SharePoint. And this integration is also available on your phone, tablet, or other mobile device using the CRM Mobile Edition. So here I'm on the tablet version. Let's go ahead and navigate to the C5 Insight account. We'll scroll down to the documents. And we have full capability to read, write, update, open these, whatever we want to do with them.
Okay. All right, so that's a little bit of the end user view of how this works. Now, why else might we want to integrate CRM and SharePoint or Dynamics and SharePoint? The reality is most organizations these days are using SharePoint. 80% of the Fortune 500 have SharePoint in some way, shape, or form using SharePoint. 80% of the Fortune 500 and 70% of all companies. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. It continues to grow. So we rarely run into companies that say we're not using SharePoint at all at this point. And 91% of organizations tend to use a CRM solution of some kind. Obviously, that's not Dynamics CRM, but actually, whether you're using Dynamics or Salesforce, there's similar integration capabilities built into both of them directly with SharePoint. So most organizations are either actively using or on the verge of using SharePoint plus some CRM tool. And I would imagine most of you, because of how we put this organization or this list together, are probably either on or considering Dynamics as your CRM tool. So bringing them together makes a lot of sense. Now, the other thing is CRM applications in general are billed as tools that help you engage with your customers. SharePoint, when you look at it as a digital workplace solution, it's really a tool to help organizations engage employees, engage each other. And what Gallup tells us is if both of those things can be accomplished, if you can engage both your customers and your employees, you can attain pretty phenomenal results. It's not easy to do. Most organizations don't have great employee and customer engagement, but solutions like these help you to do it. And one thing we have absolutely seen is when you can actually engage your customers in the process, engage your employees in the process of creating better customer engagement, that's where you really get the best traction. So if you can kind of bring these two worlds together, it really helps you build towards this vision of employees that are working together better to create a better customer experience. And so bringing these two worlds together can really help with that. So our focus is combining these applications to work together, particularly with customer-facing people within your organizations. Now, one thing we know is using a lot of applications really drives down satisfaction. Let me ask you this, just to think about. How many applications do you work with in a single day? How many of you have the luxury of working with a single application? This particular piece of research from ZDNet from a few years ago indicates that the average employee uses more than 25 applications per week to get their job done. Now, our research that we've done tells us that there's about a 14.5% drop in employee satisfaction when you go from 2 to just 3 enterprise applications to get your job done. And yet most people are using 25. So the idea here is there's a very clear correlation between customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction. If we can create an environment where our employees are more engaged and satisfied, we're going to create longer lasting, more profitable, engaging relationships with our customers as well. But the more applications we throw at our employees, the more we destroy that level of employee engagement. So another reason why you want to integrate these things is give your people less places to go to get their jobs done. And we do whole presentations on what that looks like. But in general, you want people to be using less applications to get their jobs done. Now, the other thing to know about this as you get into it, and if you're already using either or both of these applications, you are likely painfully aware of this. Both of these applications fail regularly. In fact, organizations where people say, I love our SharePoint application, or I love our CRM application, those are the exception, not the rule. Not many people say, wow, this has really made our life better. In fact, we just the other day had a relatively new client, an internal person, send something to them saying, our intranet is so much better now that we've migrated to SharePoint. I'm really enjoying it. And we grabbed a printout of that. I mean, something like that early on in the process is difficult to come by and unusual. And I don't say that to toot our own horn. It's always a challenge for everybody, no matter what you're doing. So it's important to understand that, because bringing them together does not necessarily make the potential for success go up. You need to be really careful. It's not a no-brainer to just turn on the integration and somehow that's going to help. Just as carefully as you're planning your overall SharePoint or intranet project, and just as carefully as you're planning your overall CRM project, you need to carefully plan how you're going to bring these things together. Don't shoot from the hip when you do it. It's really easy to mess things up, even though it can look simple to set it up. So let's take a quick look at how you can do CRM and SharePoint setup. It's not quite point and click as it says here. It can be simple or it can be sophisticated. So I want to point you to this and help you kind of get a general understanding of the options.
When it comes to integrating Microsoft CRM and Microsoft SharePoint, you really have 4 options to choose from. The first is a single document library for each entity in CRM. The second is a single hierarchical document library. The third one is manually pointing CRM records to the proper document library. And the last one is custom integration using the API. Let's take a look at how each of these look in production as a demo. First of all, regardless of which option you select, it looks about the same inside of CRM. You navigate to a record, you select the documents related list, and from here you see all the documents associated with this record. So the difference is in how these documents are viewed when you're viewing them from SharePoint. So let's take a look at how you configure the integration and what the different options look like in SharePoint. You configure the integration options in the settings area of Dynamics CRM under Document Management. From there you open the Document Management settings. And your first step is to choose which entities you want to manage documents for. You just check off the ones you want to use. You also set up a default SharePoint site. So as a default, this is where the document libraries will be stored. Then you set up your configuration settings around how these will be stored in SharePoint. You can base them on an entity or not. Let's take a look at what this looks like if I do not configure the integration to be based on an entity. So if I go over into SharePoint, you can see the site contents has a separate document library for each and every entity that I've configured. If I open those, you'll see a folder for each individual record containing the files for that particular CRM record. Your other option is to base this on an entity. Now let's take a look at what that looks like. If I base these on the account entity, then all the records in CRM will essentially be organized under the account entity. Each account will be given a folder in the account document library in SharePoint, and each record under the account will be given a subfolder. So you can see I have a list of accounts here that are from CRM. I actually store not just the account name, but also the GUID for the account name to make each of these folder names unique. And I can drill down into these to see the documents associated with this particular account, but I can drill even further to see the documents associated with the subrecords underneath the account. But what if your SharePoint site isn't structured like that? What if you're a more complex organization, or you don't want GUIDs in your file names, or if you want to automatically handle name changes of opportunities and accounts? What if your structure in SharePoint looks more like this? You have your basic SharePoint site. Under that site, you want to create subsites, one for each of your clients, and you might have dozens of these sites. And under each client site, you'd like to have a separate document library, one for sales and one for support. Within those libraries, you'd like to automatically create folders as new opportunities or new cases are created, so you can track those in a structured, organized way that's easy to find, whether you're looking for them in SharePoint or CRM. And what if you also want to have subsites under those clients for projects that you manage for them? And those project sites might have their own document libraries set up under them as well. What are the options for doing that? Well, you really have two options. The first option is to manually map CRM records to SharePoint sites, subsites, document libraries, and folders. So here you can see I'm looking at my standard view of SharePoint items from within CRM, and I can click Add Location, and I can go through the manual process of mapping this record to another location in SharePoint where documents should be exposed within CRM. I can give it a name. I can choose a site that it's within. If I've created a new site, I need to add it into CRM, and then I can select it here. And then I need to manually type in whatever the folder is going to be named. When I'm done with that, I can hit Save, and that new location is now available for me to create or view documents within. So that's one option. Our other option is using the API. So the API, for those of you who don't write code, is the ability to write code to make applications talk to each other. CRM has its own API, SharePoint has its own API. So you can write code such as this JavaScript that will exchange information between CRM to do things like keep names in sync, not use GUIDs, automatically create new sites, subsites, document libraries, and folders as new items are created within CRM. So those are the four options.
Okay, so four basic options for having CRM and SharePoint talk to each other, from relatively simple, provided by Microsoft, out-of-the-box integration, to very sophisticated, more developer-level access. And by the way, I am not a developer. I've worked with some developers to help me prepare this and on some client engagements. So if you can ask me developer questions, chances are I won't be able to answer them, but I'll be glad to get back to you with answers if we need to. So let's walk through a few business cases in terms of, well, how might that work well and how might that not work well? How will I choose which one of these options I want to go down the road with in our particular case? So the first case is we're going to look at the basics. We're going to look at a client who's actually doing document management, and they're a relatively small company. This was a manufacturer, and they said, you know, we're not even using SharePoint much, but we are running into issues with CRM. Some of the ones we talked about earlier. Hey, we have some file storage limitations. We'd like to be able to share files with people who aren't using CRM. We'd like better document management capabilities, those kinds of things. So they took a look at it and said, you know what, the out-of-the-box will actually work fine for us because we're not trying to integrate this into a pre-existing, really complex SharePoint structure. Now, this screen that you see right here, this is how it looks in SharePoint if I look at how these guys have set up their integration. They didn't really care about this because almost nobody was going to come through SharePoint to look at their documents. Other clients we've worked with have looked at this and said, what is that big, long, ugly number at the end of each of those folder names? That's called the GUID. It's a unique ID that's stored in CRM so that CRM and SharePoint can keep these things in sync. So if you have, for instance, a lot of opportunities under each customer record in CRM, you're going to have these really long, ugly folder names so that you can track everything if you're going to use the out-of-the-box integration. Again, if people are rarely going into SharePoint to access this, or even if you're using SharePoint elsewhere, but sales can have their own little kind of semi-private area just for managing CRM documents, this may be immaterial to you because this kind of ugly file naming convention isn't really going to show up anywhere that's going to matter to you. You're just going to see the CRM view of things. So for this manufacturer thing, they said this was terrific for them. But for another company, a telecommunications company, they took a look at it and said, you know, we can't live with this. We've got dozens and dozens of accounts, and we've got dozens and dozens of opportunities under many of those accounts, and we have a process we want to follow with those. So I'm going to get to theirs a little bit later. We like it so much we actually emulated it for ourselves. But we also worked with another manufacturer who said this works well for us, but we do have another process. They have a process that they call a tombstone process, if you've ever heard of it. Another word for tombstones is case studies, where they basically said whenever we close an opportunity as one, we want to do a tombstone. We want to say, you know, here's our case study and success in terms of how this worked. And it was a very manual process. They use CRM and they use SharePoint, but there's a lot of back and forth between sales and marketing and different applications and that kind of thing to get it done. So they said that integration is fine for our day-to-day work, but for this particular process, we need to do something different. So here's how they handle that piece of integration. In CRM, when the rep won an opportunity, it actually triggered a workflow, a standard CRM workflow that said, hey, you need to fill out this information gathering document. Now that document was actually stored in SharePoint as a template. So sales will actually fill that out and submit it. That would trigger an alert in SharePoint to marketing to look at the case study, clean it up, write up the case study. They'd have the standard multiple iteration process going back between sales and marketing to kind of get it cleaned up. And then when they set the status of that document to complete in SharePoint, it did a couple of things. It posted the file to the distributor portal so that instead of having to remember to go upload it to the portal all the time, it would automatically go there. It also posted it to the sales literature part of CRM, so it was available for reps to go consult as they looked at it in CRM. But the system of record for that document was still SharePoint. So when they later eventually go back and deactivate those case studies and say, we're no longer selling this product, so we don't want this case study anymore, whatever the case may be, all they have to do is deactivate it in SharePoint that stores the unique link, the GUID, for all the different versions of that document wherever it lives, and it will recall that document from all those places. So SharePoint stays a system of record through API access. It can keep all of those links up to date automatically. So that kind of goes from the simple end to the fairly complex end of some different case studies or scenarios and how CRM and SharePoint might be integrated. Now, for this other one, we're actually working with a regional accounting firm of about 1,200 employees. For these guys, event management was really an important part of their business model, or at least the sales and marketing part of their business model. It's where they got most of their new leads. It's where existing clients came and kind of formed new connections with them and grew relationships from there and so on. But here's how it worked for them. In CRM, they would kind of do the campaign management to create the event, basically. So they'd say, okay, we'll do that in CRM. Then we've got this other information hub we have to manage. We've got an event site, and depending on what kind of event it was, they work with different providers. So GoToWebinar for webcast type of events, but Eventbrite for live type of events, and so on and so forth. So they entered information into CRM. They went to that event site. They entered a lot of the same information into that. The next thing they did is they said, okay, now we need an internal SharePoint site because we have a global calendar in there and people want to see when these events are taking place. So we need to add that to the global calendar, but we also need to have other areas, a dedicated SharePoint site for tracking analytics around specific events and those kinds of things. Now, some of their events they did in partnership with partners. So they needed a separate SharePoint site for partners so that they could share documents with them and that kind of thing, entering some of the same information into the partner portal now. And by the way, they also had a content marketing area where they had a lot of different things that they needed to post. So whenever a new event came out, they needed to post things to their different social platforms. They needed to post something to their own website saying, here's this new event that's coming out. So they had that. And then they also had Brand Central where they kept all their templates and scripts and talking points and that kind of stuff. So you look at the structure and you realize, wow, to do a single event, these guys are spending a lot of time working across all these multiple applications. At the end of the day, it mostly came down to CRM and SharePoint, but there were a few others in there as well. So through more API level integration, they essentially stopped having to enter information almost everywhere except CRM. That does not mean those sites went away. In a few cases they did. They were able to structure their SharePoint architecture a little bit differently to help out a little bit. But it was mostly that CRM was a system of record for starting and managing all of this information, and then it automatically integrated, automatically synchronized wherever it needed to be to make the right information available across all of those platforms. And as you may know, Microsoft recently announced a new event management module that will be coming out soon. Maybe at some point they'll replace what they're doing with some of this with that event management module. But this is how they've been doing it for the last several years. So Another sophisticated level of SharePoint to CRM integration, this around a very specific business process that required a little more automation. Now, I'd mentioned the telecommunications firm earlier, and that we kind of liked what they did so much that we took it ourselves as well. So here is how we do SharePoint integration at our firm, C5 Insight. We're a consulting, a professional services firm. So we manage implementation projects for our clients. So first of all, in CRM, we have this idea of an account. Most of you are probably using CRM. You probably know what that is, but that's essentially a company. So directly inside of our CRM user interface, as you can see here, we set up some certain things to say, okay, we're automatically going to create an account site in SharePoint, and we're going to use the API because we want our own naming convention. And as you'll see in a minute, we've got some specific ways we want to share information with clients that the out-of-the-box integration didn't support so well. We also want to be able to automatically turn on or off creation of sites, depending on what kind of account it is. And we want some OneNote things that automatically happen for us as well. So when you think about the account site, when we say, yes, we want to create the account site, essentially, this is a very small snapshot of what that is. It creates a new site in SharePoint around this company. This company's name is A New Company. And it creates some document libraries you can see over there on the left-hand side as well. Now, within the document libraries, we also create a OneNote notebook automatically. And that OneNote notebook uses a very specific template that allows us to manage information about the client and also allows us to have sub-notebooks to manage particular information about the kinds of projects that we might implement for them. We change those a lot as we get into it, but at least it gives us a starting point to say, here is how we typically manage projects for our clients. We've got templates in there, and now instead of starting from scratch each time, this integration has kind of taken care of that for us. Now, at some point in the account lifecycle, we have an opportunity, ideally, an opportunity to do business with someone. So opportunities, for those of you who don't know, are something that you hope will someday turn into one or more invoices, some kind of business relationship with a client. So as we add new opportunities inside of CRM, inside of the sales docs portion of SharePoint, for those of you who know SharePoint, it's a document library we're using. For each opportunity, a folder is created. You can see there's three folders in the sales docs section for this particular client. And you can also see this does not have the ugly naming convention on it. So behind the scenes, we're using SharePoint metadata to store the CRM GUID so that we can keep those names in sync between SharePoint and CRM. But we wanted to mask that from users so you don't have real complex, ugly folder names. Candidly, for us, since we do this all the time, it didn't matter that much. But since we had to set this up for another client anyway, we could just reuse that piece of functionality on our own to also make this look nice within our SharePoint as well. Now, opportunities, when they're won, for us, typically convert into projects. So a project is a list of activities that we need to execute to deliver on whatever contractual commitment we made within the opportunity. So within the projects, we actually manage our projects within SharePoint. We do some integration between project tools and SharePoint to kind of get the project in there. And we also have sub-notebooks, as I said before, in OneNote to manage some of the internal communications around the project as well. So our clients can see the project plan directly inside of SharePoint, but that list of tasks inside the project plan, that's actually integrated back to CRM directly. And the reason we have that list of tasks integrate back to CRM is because CRM is where we do our time tracking. So now as individuals enter their individual time records inside of CRM associated with tasks in that project plan, those time records are in turn automatically syncing back with that task list in SharePoint, and our clients can actually see burn down charts in real time saying, okay, here's how many hours we thought each of these tasks or each of these milestones would take. Here's how many of those hours we've burned down so far against those particular goals. So it's a pretty sophisticated integration. We're using a tiny bit of what's available out of the box. We're using mostly what we do through the custom API, and we actually did this in a kind of a reusable toolkit kind of library so we can kind of call these routines for other custom integrations if we need to. And by the way, one of the next things we're planning on doing with this, for those of you who are aware of it, is we're going to start turning our reports into Power BI reports instead of the ones you saw, because that integrates nicely with both SharePoint and CRM, so we can make those visible to our clients and internally, and they're just nicer looking. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this. I'll come back and talk about this one a little bit later. So we've talked a little bit about the core use case scenarios of CRM and SharePoint. At the end of the day, when you integrate CRM and SharePoint at a simple level, it usually has to do with document management. Or if you get a little more sophisticated, it might have to do with integrating some of the lists, such as the time tracking and stuff like that that you saw in Hours. But it's sort of taking traditional CRM and traditional SharePoint and using both of them for what they're good at doing out of the box and making it do that together. But what if we went beyond that? What if we looked at these two tools and said, boy, we could develop whole custom applications in each one of these? And you guys might have already done some of this, but this idea of these are so easy to extend without writing code, and when you add code to it, you can extend them even further, then maybe it makes sense to build this custom proprietary thing we need to do using these platforms rather than writing custom code to do all of this. And the whole idea behind that is if you do traditional development, you spend a lot of time developing the UI and a security model and integrating with things that SharePoint and CRM integrate with right out of the box, like each other and Outlook and that kind of stuff. So you can lay all of that aside and say, let's take all this great work that's already been done and let's just add our business processes on top of that. So what does that look like? Does that work well? When does it work? When doesn't it work? One of the first things I want to be very candid about is what we call the no-code myth. There's this idea, and we've seen people kind of fall victim to this pretty regularly, that these solutions are so flexible that you can build very sophisticated, complete applications without writing any code at all. While that's true in theory, what we have found again and again is if you want to do anything beyond the pretty basic stuff, at some point you need to write some code for it. And if you want to do something beyond the boundaries of what these applications do, at some point you probably need to do some integration between these. So the way we look at it is this. When you're thinking about doing something custom, most custom application projects are at the intersection of at least two, if not all three, of these circles. So if you want to build a loyalty tracking system, which I'll talk about in just a minute, you might have components that are mostly in CRM, but you might need a little custom development on top of that, as one example. So I warn you, if you're thinking about developing an application on top of one or both of these, please go in with your eyes wide open. I'll share a case study where that did not work so well for someone we helped out, and how you can kind of assess it to understand where the fit might be. And by the way, the struggles tend to be when you think you can just do one of these or the other, which again, I'll come back and share a case study on in a minute. Now, looking at this differently, you might have heard of this idea of a gap analysis. If you have, this will be a little bit of repetition for you. If you have not, this might be a little bit enlightening. And even if you have, I think you're going to pick up a thing or two here that you might not have considered. So the blue ball there over on the right-hand side of the screen, let's say that's the requirements for your ideal solution. You want to do something, and you've got a list of requirements for it. And then you take a look at something like Dynamics or SharePoint, and you say, hey, here's how much of our requirements this platform can cover. So you can see the overlap there. That's the fit. That's how good of a fit this application is with your requirements. And the gap is the part that doesn't overlap. Okay, here are the parts that this solution's not going to be able to do very well. And maybe through some combination of either integrating with another platform like Dynamics and SharePoint, and or maybe some custom development, you can cover some or all of that gap. So that's essentially when people do a fit gap analysis, that's what they're talking about, is how close can I get the fit? Does it make more sense to do custom coding, or does it make more sense to leverage one of these platforms? Now, here are the couple of parts that people sometimes miss, though. On the far left is your risk. That's this idea of here are requirements either we can't meet, or it's really cost prohibitive to extend this platform to meet these requirements. So sometimes it's actually more expensive to build something on top of, or a piece of something on top of Dynamics or SharePoint than it would be to build that as a completely separate solution. So you need to be aware of that. The limitations of these platforms sometimes impose on you can sometimes be a showstopper. You want to know what that looks like. But the thing that people really miss often is on the far right-hand side of that diagram, and that's what we call the opportunity. That's this idea of here are things that we didn't even imagine we could do, or we just said there's no way we can afford to have that functionality built into this application because it's cost prohibitive, so we're not even thinking about it. But these platforms might support some of that. So that's the theory. Let's jump into a little bit of reality with some case studies and that kind of thing about how all of this might work. Here's an example from a hardware manufacturer loyalty program application. So these guys manufacture hardware, and they actually had a loyalty program, and it was managed in a homegrown system. A little bit more background on it. This loyalty program, they sell through distributors, and then they sell to what they call end buyers, and those end buyers, who tend to be retailers or sometimes very large wholesalers, then sell to the consumers who buy them. This loyalty program was focused on their distributor network to get them more loyal, and their end buyers, the retailers and others like them who still resell the product. So it was sort of a two-tier loyalty program. They had it managed on an in-house system that they built custom. It wasn't very complex, but it was a custom system. And they had a process around that where they said, hey, our sales team needs to meet with these distributors yearly to review their loyalty points program and help them set targets for what they want to do, because the whole distributor was incentivized to meet certain goals in order to get discounts so they could get better margins when they sell their equipment. So the thing we took a look at with them is this. This is our system. You can develop your own, but we essentially said if something is a standard feature right out of the box in one of these platforms, then we say that's a 100% fit. If it requires configuration only, meaning adding a new field to a form or creating a view or creating a new document library in SharePoint or something like that, that's almost a fit too. That's 95%. No code involved, very simple to maintain. If it requires processes such as workflows that are available both in CRM and SharePoint, not custom development, but getting a little deeper in technology, we're going to call that a 90% fit. If there's a third-party app that extends these solutions to meet some of the needs, we're going to call that a 75% fit. If it requires integration with some other platform, we're going to call that a 50% fit. If it requires custom development, we're going to call that a 25% fit, assuming that custom development is on top of the platform. And of course, if it's not available at all, we just can't find a rational way to do it, we're going to say that that's a 0% fit. Now, typically when you look at this, if you say it's a 50% plus fit, you should think carefully about maybe doing it, maybe not. If you get up to about 60, 70% fit, it's almost certainly better to do it on top of one of these platforms than it is custom, because it'll cost a lot more to do that. As we looked at this particular one, the degree of fit based on those criteria was an 87.1% degree of fit. So it looked like it made a lot of sense to migrate over into a Dynamics plus SharePoint integrated platform. The interesting thing was when we looked at the opportunity analysis, there was about a third of the total requirements, not really requirements because this third wasn't in the requirement list, but a third of the functionality that they would now have were things that were opportunity. So one thing they looked at was they said, you know, it's a pain because when our reps go visit with customers, distributors to do their annual review of this, they take a printout of it, they make notes on it, they bring it back to the office with them, they log into the system, and they update that. Now they'll actually have their mobile device with them, and right on their mobile device they can talk to the customer. The customer can actually work through making those changes with them while they're right there in front of them, because these applications support that. They can generate documents that go into a SharePoint document library automatically that then gets shared out to the customer so they can see that automatically. So there's some exciting things for them that they could get some more value out of, and probably the most exciting thing was because the process was so much more efficient, they've actually gone to a quarterly review process with their distributors rather than annual, which has actually helped to improve the revenues coming from those distributors much more than they had before. So these are the kind of hidden gems you can sometimes get if you carefully understand the fit gap. Now, I'm sharing with you a positive experience right here. Let me share with you a negative experience, because you need to know these don't always fit, or sometimes the creating the fit is a little more complex than you may think. This was a, I call it an energy adjacent company. It was not an energy company. It was a federally mandated organization that had to do some specific reporting around the energy industry. So they had gotten a demo of SharePoint. I'm trying to remember the sequence. I think it actually started with CRM. They got a demo of CRM and they saw how they could easily create new tables and lists and that kind of stuff with it. And they said, oh, wow, this will work great for our reporting application. So they spent well into the six figures, got a really good CRM solution architect on the project. And as they got through about half of the requirements, they started to really slow down a lot until they finally realized we're running into a lot of showstoppers here. This solution is not becoming the tight fit we thought it would be. They backed up, They got another organization to come in. They got a demo of SharePoint. They said, oh, wow, this is better because it gives us a portal that our clients, if you will, our partners need to get access to this on. These list web parts look like they're going to work as well as the CRM things. Off they work to the races again. Almost the exact same process. Well into the 6 figures, suddenly the project started to stammer and slow down, and they realized we're running into obstacles we can't solve with this tool. And a solution architect. These were not developers alone. So they kind of called us in and said, you know, which one is the right one? And this is what we came back to them with. And we actually kind of said, let's look at your database model at the top. So CRM has its own back-end database model. SharePoint has its own back-end database model. Yes, those sit on top of SQL Server, but with SQL Server, you of course have much more flexibility to create whatever data model that you want. Then we looked at the user interface, and we said, what's the right user interface for you? So we wanted to look at this fit gap, not just from the standpoint of it's a foregone conclusion that it's CRM or SharePoint, but maybe neither of those fit. And as we went through that whole process, what we said was the back-end database for CRM is going to work fine for you guys. The work you've done in that's going to work well. It's great for tracking your data. But the front-end ability for CRM to present that information is really not great, especially not for your end users. You need more of a portal. SharePoint has the portal, but SharePoint's ability to show you that information in the portal is very limited. The list web parts were not working for integration with CRM. Yes, that's possible, but it just didn't work very well. So we said you also need some custom code on top of this, custom ASP.NET pages that are rendered inside of SharePoint. So you're leveraging CRM's ability to manage your database and do some reporting with it in a very relational format. You're leveraging SharePoint's ability to generate and manage documents for you and also to deliver this information via portal. And then you're leveraging CRM's ability again in the back end for your administrative people to do better management of this overall. So that's ultimately what these guys came up with. Now, others, CRM and SharePoint might not make any sense at all. You might have a completely custom application. But just know as you get into this and really look at it, you should go in with your eyes wide open and know these are very powerful tools. We think they can solve you know, the majority of most business automation processes, but we also know from experience they can't solve all business automation processes. You need to look at them carefully from a cost standpoint as well as the ease of maintenance and all of those kinds of things. Now, the other thing to know is you're now working in the world of Office 365, right? There are awesome new capabilities being rolled out in there all the time. So going a little beyond just SharePoint and Dynamics, Microsoft is building in more and more integration capabilities for things like Flow. Flow is a tool in Office 365 that lets you share information across applications in 365, but also across applications that are not in Office 365. We're actually working with a client right now who has a Smartsheet portal that their outside customers access data on, and they're constantly updating that themselves. Well, now through Flow, CRM and Smartsheet can kind of integrate with each other to exchange information. Power Apps is a way for creating very cost-effective data entry forms and simple applications that can be accessed on mobile devices and websites to make some things available that aren't as easy to recreate in either SharePoint or CRM, but they integrate the back-end data with both of those applications. The list goes on and on. So understand what the tools are in your toolbox as you look at these, but the real idea behind this, in our view, is yes, these can integrate with each other to do some really great things around lowering costs, making document management easier, fewer applications for people to use, but also the real vision for this is to ask yourself, how are you going to reimagine your productivity? And think beyond just here's SharePoint, here's what it does, here's CRM, and here's what it does, but instead think about here's our business, here's what it does, here's what it needs to do, here are things that can be strategic differentiators for us, and how can we leverage these two very powerful platforms to actually take our business further, faster than we would by developing custom applications or learning to live without certain things. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but a couple of quick things before you go, just for some more material. One slide I skipped was a SharePoint feedback tool. If you are using SharePoint in your organization and you'd like to have a simple way for your users to kind of click a button and give you feedback that tells you what page they were on when they clicked that. So the feedback might be this is broken, or I don't like how this works, or hey, this works great. We have a free tool. If you go to the link right there, c5n.co/spfeedback, you can download that tool and you can install it in SharePoint. And as always, with all those things, we would say install it in a test environment first, play around with it before you decide if you want to use it. But it's a very simple tool that can help you get a little more connection with your SharePoint users. We also offer that integration toolkit that I talked about. If you want to see more on that, you can look at it there. And if you'd like to look at kind of diving deeper with planning CRM and SharePoint projects, addressing issues, not so much technical issues, but planning issues around how do we do a roadmap? What does governance for these things look like? How do we keep our data clean? How do we drive user adoption? We actually offer 4 workshops a year. We've got 2 planned coming up in the fall. One is about CRM and one's intranet/digital workshop. If you would like to attend those, you can go to successaccelerators.com. So I'd invite you guys to engage with us that way if that's something you'd like to learn more about. So Suzanne, I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I guess I'll open it also by saying, hey, thank you for coming, and I love to hear from folks who attended, good or bad comments. So if you want to send anything to me, if it's a comment or a question, here's all of my contact information, or if you just want to connect with me on social, there's my social connections.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. Great presentation there today. I do have a couple questions. First off, how much integration can I do with Dynamics CRM and SharePoint without writing any code at all?
So if I go back to the 4 option slide, great question. If I go back to the 4 option slide, I believe that was the first 2 options. So the heart of what you can do without writing any code at all is really integrating the documents between the 2 of these things. So you can make SharePoint documents visible inside of CRM. You can create SharePoint documents inside of CRM and they'll go into SharePoint for you automatically. It's all about document management. It's all about getting better document management capabilities, and it's all about saving money on potential storage fees inside of Dynamics CRM. If you want to go beyond that, for example, if you have a hierarchy that you need to manage documents through that isn't supported without writing code, or if you want to integrate a list web part or something like that, if you want to pass information back and forth that is not a list of documents, then you're going to need to look at writing some code to do that.
Right, thank you. Next one is, our client process aligns with one of the examples shared about client and project management. How much time would it take to set that up?
So the first time we did this, it took a long time to set it up. Now, that was a long time ago back. I think it was SharePoint 2010 and CRM 4. The applications have evolved a lot since then. So I'm going to venture a guess and say if you were to set that up from scratch, assuming you had developers who know the API, you're probably going to invest somewhere between 250 and 500 hours to get that done, assuming you're actually going to write up the requirements, you're going to code it, you're going to do good QA testing and all of that kind of stuff. We do have the toolkit that shortcuts a lot of that. So we use the toolkit whenever we do that. That does not take it down to 0 because every client is a little bit different, but at least it gives us callable routines that make that a little easier. The other thing I'd suggest you look at, I haven't myself real recently, but look at Flow. Microsoft keeps adding new things to Flow, and you might see that they've actually created the ability to create some of that integration through Flow that will save you from having to write the code to do it. At some point, I should probably do another webinar on that when we dive deeper into it. But before you commit a lot of resources to it, kind of understand your requirements and look at Flow and see if it will do what you need it to do.
Great, thank you so much. All right, I think that's all the questions we have today. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Jeff, for presenting. We ask that you just take a few more minutes to give us your feedback on today's session and also sharing what topics you would like covered in future webinars. Simply email your comments to info@archerpoint.com. Again, thank you for your time, and this concludes today's session. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Jeff. Bye, everyone.